Right, welcome back grade 12s. This is where we ended off the last session. So we're looking at the legislation. So we're focusing on each act individually, just to give you a nutshell version of each one of the acts. Remember, use a little bit of common sense when you talk about the acts or when they ask you about the acts. Remember that the name of the act says what it is. The name of the act says what it does, and the name of the act kind of explains to you what it is there for. So when you move on and we start looking at each one of individual acts, skills development focuses on quality of the education. But the reason why it is a piece of legislation and it was implemented in businesses, in places of work, is because it focuses on the quality of education, but specifically in the workplace. Remember that. You must remember that. If it's not in the workplace, then you need to know that it is definitely not part of skills development. So that means you focus on your corporate social investment. But in the workplace, it focuses on skills development. The reason why this act was implemented, first of all, is to create standards. And that would then be specifically for sectors or specific industries. So it is setting industry standards to make sure that everyone with a certain qualification or a certain skill can do something specific. If you now improve the skills of your employees, that means they become more productive. The fallout of that is, if they are more productive, that means they work more efficiently. And if they work more efficiently, that means the business becomes more profitable. So that means it's a good thing for your business. It increases the skilled workers, which is then a good thing because this helps with the efficiency and the profitability of the business. And also a good thing that comes out of this is the employees feel more valued. So the negatives or the negative impact, remember your positives would be impact as well as your negatives. They talk about impact, advantages or disadvantages. So the business must pay the 1%, that would be your skills development levy, and small businesses will find it difficult to give workers time off for training. Remember, this is specifically aimed at large businesses. This, what we are looking at for impact, is focused on large businesses. If you have a small business and there's only 2 people working front of the business, then it's difficult to give all of them off. If you take Checkers, for instance, which is a large business, there's a lot of tills, there's a lot of people operating the tills. They can do the skills development. They can do the training and take people away from the till specifically. So it is a challenge for small businesses to then actually give people off and do the specific training. So in order to comply with the Skills Development Act, the employers or the businesses must register with SETAs. SETAs, remember, is your sector education and training authorities, and they look after the specific training that happens in each one of the industries. So the penalties that can follow is any person convicted of a fraudulent offence may be sentenced to a fine or imprisonment, or they can actually stop them from operating. So in order for the business to discriminate against this particular act would mean that they look at unfair development of skills, or they restrict certain employees from not actually doing this. So the next one, Labour Relations Act. Remember, Labour Relations Act is the relationship between the employer and the employee. So you're looking at how do they get together, how do they work together, and what are they focusing on? So the relationship between these two. This is what labor relations is all about. You get parties involved there, remember? So you look at your trade unions and your employer organizations that does get involved. And then you look at collective bargaining, where all of them look at payment and or remuneration and working conditions. So the framework. So it says what can be done and what can't be done. That's what the word framework means. What must be done. That is the focus of the framework. So what must be done between your employer and your employee? What can happen? What should happen? So it looks at that relationship. It promotes a healthy relationship between your employers and employees because it gives the employees the grievance procedure. So that means if there is grievances, they can speak up. So that is part of the Labor Relations Act. Then it promotes orderly collective bargaining. Now collective bargaining, collective means everyone together. Bargaining is negotiations. So that means they look at how can the employer and the employee work together, negotiate collectively together, and that would then resolve the disputes or the grievances that does exist in the business. The negative impact of this is the cost of labor increases because of strikes. Strikes is something that is a right of employees by means of the Labor Relations Act. There is a process that needs to be followed, so they can't just rock up at work one morning and decide today we are striking. There is a process that must be followed, so that is an important part that you need to remember. And then it reduces global competitiveness. Now, why does it reduce global competitive? Global meaning the world. So why does it make us less competitive in the world, and why does it lower productivity in the business? Because work stands still. So work stands still and the business is not making anything or selling anything, and that is the biggest problem. And that's why it influences global competitiveness. Then employers must allow the formation of workplace forums. Now the workplace forum is then an, in inverted commas, a internal trade union. But it's not a trade union. I repeat, workplace forum is not a trade union. Workplace forum looks after mostly working conditions. They cannot, and I will repeat that, they cannot intervene when it comes to remuneration. Then the financial costs is very hefty fines when it comes to improper implementation of the Labor Relations Act. So there's fines from the CCMA, the Commission for Conciliation, Mediation and Arbitration, and then discriminatory actions means the employer does not grant the employees union representation. So that means they don't allow unions on the premises or to exist there. Then if you look at employment equity, equity is all about equal, remember, so that you look at fair treatment, equal opportunity in the workplace. So it promotes, that's the positive impact that happens when the Employment Equity Act is implemented properly. It promotes the equal opportunities and the fair treatment of all employees, and it also promotes diversity. Now, diversity, we all know, is differences. So the different cultures, it looks at cultures, it looks at races, it looks at different genders. So when it becomes diversity, or when it becomes a diverse workplace, it focuses on having representation of all of those different people in the business. So the negative impact when it comes to employment equity is you need to submit employment equity reports every 2 years. So there is administration with regards to this particular act. And then also businesses must train or employ someone that knows a lot about the act. So they need to employ a specialist to implement this act specifically and focus on how they can work with equal treatment in the business. Employers must promote equal opportunities. So when they advertise positions, when they do promotions, every person, regardless of what their status is, their culture is, their race is, their gender is, every person must then get a equal opportunity. And that is what employment equity is all about. It's about the equal treatment, the equal opportunities for all employees in the business. So remember, all of these acts are specific for businesses and implemented inside the businesses. So if an employer is found guilty, they can be fined or ordered to pay compensation to the employees that was treated unfairly. Then refusing an employee because of religious beliefs, that would be the discriminatory action that a business can do. Basic conditions of employment. We've established that your basic conditions of employment is the minimum requirements. That must exist. The minimum hours, the minimum thing. So that means it creates a framework for acceptable employment practices. So it looks after the employees and it makes sure to provide that the business cannot take for granted the employees that works for them. It promotes fair treatment of employees in the business because of everyone now works the same hours. Everyone does the same work. So that is the focus of, and that's why they use fair treatment here as well. The negatives would then be the processes and procedures for basic conditions can be very costly and very tedious. So you need to look at what are these processes and procedures. So what is the minimum hours? What is the leave? What is all of the minimum standards that a person must work according to, the minimum wage, the wages that must be paid. So that means it can limit operations because now we're looking at things like overtime. People can only work a certain amount of overtime, so therefore you need to then employ more employees. You need to get more people working for the business in order to not be limited by this particular act. So for the compliance, an employer must give workers information about their job and their job description and the working conditions, and the important part here is it must be in writing, and that would then be your employment contract. So that is what you need to look at, the employment contract that there is. The business could be fined and legal action could be taken, and this is then done through the labor court. Remember that the CCMA focuses on the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, so that means, and the Labor Relations Act, so that means it focuses on this, and this will happen in labor court. So this is not a civil lawsuit that then happens. Then discriminatory actions with regards to basic conditions of employment is preventing workers having access to their employment contract. So telling them they can't know what their contract says, or they don't have a copy of their contract, or they don't know what the conditions is that they work under. Compensation for occupational injuries and diseases. Now this is focusing on payment where there is either an injury or disease because of the work that they did. So it focuses on that. So therefore the Compensation for Occupational Injuries and Diseases Act, so COIDA, focuses on the protection of the employees if something should happen, so injured or killed on a contract. So that means work that they are doing. So this act promotes the safety in the workplace, and it also then sets a process in place where people can claim, and that claim would then be for the payment according to the act. So focusing on what that is. Implementation, so that means it can be tedious and it can be expensive because there's a lot of red tape with regards to this. It's a very bureaucratic process, especially the claiming process, because the people need to make sure that it's not a fraudulent claim. So focusing on this, there's definitely a very big admin load when it comes to this particular act. Compliance, the business must then register with the commissioner of the compensation fund before anything of this can happen. So if the business is not registered, if they are not registered, that means they cannot claim. So that means there's no claims that can happen, and that is then non-compliance or discriminatory if the business isn't registered. However, if the business now wants the employee not to claim, so they don't want to report the injury, they don't want the employee to be claimed, that is also a discriminatory action, and there is definitely fines when it comes to this. So that means the employer, for not notifying the commissioner within the specified time, so there's a specific time that you need to be reporting the incidents in. So broad-based black economic empowerment focuses on inequality. It is tried to fix the inequality in South Africa. Remember, all of these acts are based in South Africa, and it does not affect the international scene. So it's not anywhere else in the world. So it aims at targeting the inequality that happens, and this is done through improving employment and management and ownership of previously disadvantaged people under this particular act. So the positives of this is it improves the image of the business, it develops the employees' potential, so therefore it looks at the skills and it boosts staff morale because staff are now more valued or put in positions of management, and also given the opportunity of ownership. So that means it is something that improves the overall morale of employees. So many businesses don't have a BEE rating, so that means they are not compliant and they are not looking at the pillars of BEE. Investment in ownership can now cause animosity because people have biases with regards to race and gender and color, and that can be an issue. So compliance, when the business complies, you look at preferential procurement. So where do the businesses buy their resources? So that means where do they purchase the things that they need? So that's one of the things that you can look with the BEE standards. Companies that do not comply can be prosecuted and fined, and that can then end up in court. So refusing to award tenders to black suppliers who are BEE compliant is then a discriminatory action that can go against this particular act. So the National Credit Act focuses on credit, and this you must remember. It focuses on credit. So at the point of transaction, there is no money that happens. So there is no money exchange. It is a pay later situation. So that means you do it on account. So that is what the Credit Act focuses on. So it promotes the social as well as the financial interest of the business, because credit providers cannot take advantage of consumers when it comes to interest rates or those type of things. The positives about this is it prevents reckless lending. So that means businesses can't give everyone everything they want. They focus on what the consumer can afford. So they look at affordability, which is a very big help. So then people can't be over indebted. So that means there's credit agreements, and the credit agreements must be easy to read and easy to understand. So the negative about this is it extended the administrative capacity. So that means there will have to be people appointed, specialists, when it comes to setting up the agreements and also then recovering the debt, because you can't just blacklist someone. There's a whole process that needs to be gone through. So businesses need to have someone in charge of all of the credit in this particular business. So the credit providers must do an affordability assessment. That's how they can then comply with this particular act. So check the consumer. They check their income. They check their expenses. And then they check what do they have left. So what is their disposable income? And then they look at, can they afford that particular loan or that particular account? If yes, then credit is granted. If no, then they do not grant the credit. So businesses that does not comply will lose money, and they will then also lose the money that the people owe them. So if they did not follow the process, so if there is people that does and they didn't recover the money according to the process that needs to be followed, that money is then lost. So refusing to grant credit based on gender, race, religion, or age, that is discriminatory. But if they look at the disposable income, they look at the affordability, and the consumer cannot afford it, then they do not grant the credit, and they must provide reasons. So they must be able to say, why did they not grant that? The Consumer Protection Act is then focusing on all consumers. So everyone that walks into a business with money in their hand that can pay for something, that is what the Consumer Protection Act. So that means responsible consumer behavior as well. It gives the business as much rights as it does the consumers. So it makes it fair for both sides. So that both sides would be the business as well as the consumer. So it does not give the consumer any rights that they can do whatever they want and then expect the business to just do what the customer says. So that is also there to help resolve disputes. Businesses that does not comply with the Act need to ensure that they comply with the Act so they are not penalized. Doesn't say they aren't penalized, it means they need to comply in order to penalize. And the first thing that they must look at is the safety of consumers. That is one of the big issues that the Consumer Protection Act focuses on. So many businesses, there's a lot of documentation to comply with this act, and it makes it a admin-rich act to actually then focus on. So businesses comply in terms of this, and you look at the National Consumer Commission. That is who sets out these conditions that needs to be complied with. So the consequences is then fines according to CPA. So the Consumer Protection Act would then be costly to implement because businesses can be fined for improper treatment of consumers. Charging unfair prices is discriminatory because fair prices, marketing, and also, like I said before, safety of the consumers is the main concern. So that is the Act in a nutshell. Thank you.